Attention, soldiers, you are now entering the war zone. Please keep close to your compatriots and have your weapons at the ready. If you would like to skip the introduction, please fast forward to about 7.5 minutes. And now, poets at war.
Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy.
Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her book. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who's got to live in the imaginary time of the story, there's no interval between putting down the book and hearing the knock. But I, her creator, between writing the first part of that sentence and the second, may have gone out for an hour's walk and spent the whole hour thinking about Mary.
We make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all in the darkness bind them.
Tolkien and Lewis, both in their way, lifted me out of this world to show me a thundering beauty. And when I read the last sentence and came tumbling back to earth, I could still hear the peal. I hear it to this day. God allowed those stories to lift the veil on the imaginary world to show me the real world behind it, which ended up being, in the end, the one I was already in. The real world, at least in part, isn't out there somewhere, nor is it in my mind. It's here, right under my feet, all around me. Tolkien and Lewis held the fabric of Narnia or Middle-earth in one hand and clutched our world in the other, building a bridge across which we could set out for perilous realms and yet return safely with some of the beauty we found there.
My first and last philosophy, that which I believe in with unbroken certainty, I learnt in the nursery. I generally learnt it from a nurse, that is, from the solemn and star-appointed priestess at once of democracy and tradition. The things I believed most then, the things I believe most now, are the things called fairy tales.
We live in a moment that's unlike any other moment, a moment of bizarre tyranny, a moment of overreach.
I was nearly torn apart by a crazy doctor.
A moment of fear. It's like, and how are we living? How are we standing up in this moment?
I was made asleep by a bunch of mangy pirates.
Are we full of joy? Like, are we characters who are full of joy and unafraid?
I'm eaten. Got that? Eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. And not to mention being tossed, squashed, and scared practically to death.
It's like, how do we image God in this particular narrative in which we've been placed, in this chapter? And we get trained for that by reading about Sam and Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf, and reading, Charlotte's Web and Animal Farm, and reading about Prince Caspian. Like, when you're little, you read those things and you read stories when you're older, and it reinforces what is the courageous action of a character in this moment.
Yet you stand before me.
Well, yeah.
Think, boy. What kind of an adventure would you have had if I brought you here with a turn of the page?
I wept bitterly, and then I said to myself, when everything happens quite miserably, then He sends help. I have always read so. People must first of all suffer a great deal before they can bring anything to accomplishment.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body.
minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chain could not bring that proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Thy songs were made for the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. The chains upon the people came, and they gave away their freedom. No prophets left, they then grew lame, they accepted their false kingdom. But one young man saw the minstrel boy, and he took up the shredded strings, and with great love remade with joy the sacred tool for truth to sing.
Coming into our discussion today, you guys were the ones who suggested doing, I forget which one, formats. I think it was Brendan, right? Specifically on video games you wanted to touch on, but we've decided formats in general.
Media.
Yeah. Media formats, that kind of thing. I think that the big question ultimately comes down to, and this to me feels like a well-drawn, argued path, regardless of whether we agree or Christians agree or whatever. It reminds me of the modesty arguments in many ways, a lot of the ones that I've had, simply because there are at least two sides that have some very good Christian points that ultimately are just shouting at each other and not actually getting at a lot of the real points. I think that there's been, let's just address the elephant in the room as far as Christianity goes, and that's the fundamentalism regarding and we can give it its points, but I'm saying the big player in the Christian space as far as formats go, to me, is the fundamentalist idea of, well, let's just say that they've pushed against every new format as it's come along. And the latest one has been video games. And they usually press it as they push all the negatives of a format and none of the positives, and say, keep your kids away, everything's gonna just, destroy them and blah blah blah. I'm not saying that is or isn't true at the moment. I'm just saying, like, let's see that for what it is and get it out as the big giant player in our space. The fundamentalist approach, that's the first thing we can go ahead and address. Who wants to address it first? The fundamentalism side. I brought this out first just in case it went long, but I'm figuring we kind of have our thoughts and we're going to move past it. We'll see.
Well, yeah, I think From a historical perspective, you're right. Every single new medium that comes along has this sort of pushback against it. There are some people who would say, oh, the printing press was pushed back against because the people in power didn't want the common people to read. That's historically inaccurate. Peasants could read. That's the fact of the matter, right? There was, if people couldn't read, the printing press would have done nothing.
Right.
That's, it falls on its own logic. But movies, but from books to movies, from movies to TV, from TV
radio. You skipped radio.
Radio, yeah, radio. Yep. There was a huge pushback against radio, with people like being afraid that demons were going to come into your room through it or something like that. Ridiculous brainwashing. People are afraid of comics. That would reduce literacy or whatever. So, like, to a certain degree, you run into this issue where, but here we are now, and some people would argue that we're worse off. Some people would argue that we're better off. It doesn't matter. That's the point is like, this is what happens from a historical standpoint. It doesn't look like new medium automatically equals worse.
Right.
It could, but you need to change. You need to define your terms, and you need to say what is worse and why. I will say that the average American attention span has drastically decreased. People used to go to debates and sit for hours and listen to politicians debate and keep up with the arguments and stuff. Now our attention span is lower than that of a goldfish. Not exactly a good look. But the question is that because of the medium, or is that because of how the medium is being used? Film pacing... Sorry, go on.
Not only were people listening to political debates and keeping up with the arguments in a, like, oh, this is a good thing to do. They were doing it for fun.
Yeah.
Like, the Lincoln Douglas debates were them going to towns, and then all of the townspeople going there because, ooh, there's a debate. And that's what they did for fun.
Exactly. Say what you will about Raiders of the Lost Ark. It changed film pacing forever. You watch a film before Raiders and you watch films after Raiders, and the pacing just skyrockets in speed. YouTube, edit faster. Like, that's sort of the mantra. I mean, so I had to dig to find, at least some people in most saying parts of YouTube.
Yeah.
I had to dig to find people saying you're editing too fast. But the average idea is you got to grab their attention immediately, and you need to hold that attention and just go. There's an argument that it's what Michael Bay is doing, right? But again, the question is that the medium, or is that how the medium is being used?
Right.
So I don't know.
I got some thoughts, but I want Alex to get his in here. I'm going to be a little more on the other side than you probably, Brendan, on some of this, but I mean, I don't think it's going to be too far. I think that there's a few linchpins that bring us together, but go ahead, Alex.
So I actually did a little bit of research for this discussion on mediums, and I went back and re-listened to Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. In case anybody is unfamiliar. You've read it?
Yes, I had to for class.
Yeah. Good book. It's a really interesting book. I'm not sure that I completely agree with his, I guess, condemnation of film and television as a medium that is incapable of higher thought, but it's really interesting, especially in the way that he defines television as a synthesis of the immediacy or the grasping of an instantaneous moment, a particular moment of a photograph, and then the bridging of space in the telegraph, and how television combines both of those to make something that is completely irrelevant for you, in your day-to-day life. That's what he argues the Telegraph did. Oh, yes, you know exactly what happened to Princess Margaret over across the sea. And then you continue on with your day because that has no bearing on your actual life at all. And then the photograph that keeps you from, or that doesn't talk about trees, he says, but talks about that tree. Doesn't talk about people, it talks about that person. And I find the argument really interesting, even though I disagree with it. As a aspiring photographer and a lover of film, I think that you can say interesting things in film that you can't say with a book, because you're able to put different spins on it. You're able to emphasize things a lot more, much easier through film than you are with other mediums. Obviously, his argument that the written word is superior as far as logic goes is pretty unassailable. I don't think he's wrong there, but I'm not sure that I completely agree with his throwing away of the other mediums either.
All right.
That being said...
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, you're good.
His argument that the medium inherently contains in it the message of the thing does seem pretty compelling. That the medium is the problem, is at least a large portion of the problem, not just the way that people are using it.
Okay. Before I jump into that, fundamentalism, going back to that idea that I brought up at the beginning, I just wanted to address one of the big ways that I'm fond of mentioning where fundamentalism's push back against any sort of innovation is hilarious, especially to me, is in the fact that what is the oldest church instrument in you guys' minds? Like, that has been used in Western. What is the oldest Western traditional instrument in public worship that you can think of?
We'd like to argue the voice, technically.
Technically, let's go with what we would call an instrument as far as it's created. Yeah, organ is what most people would say.
Yeah,
Brendan, would you agree? The organ was pushed back against because they said that the hurdy-gurdy, which was a two-man instrument at the time, not the one man that we know now, the hurdy-gurdy was actually the medieval equivalent at the time, and it was played by two people, and that was used to lead people in the worship. And they claimed that the possibility of having bass that was not a consistent drone would lead people astray because the consistent drone, and this is the argument of Scottish music in general with the bagpipes and everything else, it is a reflection. Having a key note, the key bass note, is the reflection of having a consistent God behind the whole of the changing universe, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. So you got to think, like, these people have always pushed back, always. And so I just wanted to point that one out. You know, they pushed against changing the organ to the piano, and now there's a lot of push from changing the piano to guitars goodness gracious, God forbid we bring in drums of any sort, right? So with that being said, I think the issue here is the idea of a zero-sum game. And let me draw that all together, okay? I think Alex has already drawn it. He's smiling, or at least he has an idea where I'm going. Essentially, there is an idea that every format has its drawbacks, and we can create or find a format that has all the proper capabilities. A lot of people will make the claim, because the Bible was written in text, which it wasn't originally, it was oral tradition, but beyond that, it was written down, and we have a written down version, and that's our canon, you know, and that's the way God finalized it, let's put it that way. we have this idea that, we have an ultimate format, and as a result, any other format is just superfluous. That is a basic assumption of a lot of people, that any other format for any purpose is superfluous if there is a primary way that is completely the greatest method in which to speak, in which case we should all be pushing way harder for Latin 2.0 and make the whole world speak it. And we should have no other, we should drive out all those ignorant
Hebrew and Greek, right?
Right. And then we should drive out all those Welsh people, and punish them in the schools if they speak Welsh, because that's a real thing that happened in many different places. In Louisiana, most close to home, the Creole people throughout the early part of the 20th century were corporally punished because they would speak to each other in Creole, and they couldn't be understood by the teachers, and they drove it out of them. God has always been, and you can make the Babel case, sure, but even before that, there was ridiculous varieties. God is a God of varieties. And I think that the idea of a new medium coming in and grabbing the imagination of someone else is terrifying, not only from the perspective of, we just need the primary format, but also from the perspective of it is taking from the other formats. It is robbing the other formats of their ability to speak. And I believe that's the idea of a zero-sum game, right? Essentially, you have a certain amount of intellectual whatever, and it ebbs and flows as time goes on. We get our big thinkers, and they can put more back into the cookie jar, right? So to speak. They can put more intellectual energy back into the cookie jar. You following me? And essentially, that gets disseminated back out through their works, whatever they are. And so that goes to the people. They have their cookies, and the cookie jar gets refilled. Essentially, they're saying that any improper dissemination of cookies equals leakage in the cookie jar. Right? We're losing cookies. Cookies are going bad. Cookies are going rancid. And I think that comes down, but let's do water instead, because leaking, right? I really think every time that I hear arguments that any format, and porn is not a format, porn is a genre, so we can't even put that on the table. Any format is just a language. And I don't know of any place ever where Christ set a pox upon a language unless he was tying it to the people dying off. And in fact, we're supposed to speak Pentecostally, not charismatic, but Pentecostally, to every tribe, tongue, and nation. Mm-hmm. So for me, just in a broad, big picture sort of way, publishing, whatever you're publishing, in every format is acting in a Pentecostally proper way. So I'm just putting that view out there. And we can go from there. Y'all can take it down, do what you want to do with it. But I just wanted to bring that view to bear because I hear almost no one talking this way. I don't think I originated it. I'm sure there are other people who think the way I do, but I haven't met them yet.
Okay, so I like the. I hadn't thought of it as though they were thinking in a zero-sum game, and it seems like it holds water for at least a fair bit. I'm not sure that it holds water for Postman, because it seems like it's a really strong argument that as the medium of film has increased, as television or even radio, or less so radio, but as particularly film and television have increased, literacy has gone down. People don't read anymore.
Sure.
Just generally speaking. And the other thing that I don't see that as zero sum. I think that there's a way to do both, but there are a limited number of hours in the day, and people will have to choose how they spend it. I think that they can choose to divide their time more equally. And as I said, I love film. I have a couple of film scripts sitting right over there because I just like having the physical script in my hand and being able to run through how the film was constructed on that level. But it seems like there are some things that you can do better. Strike that. There are some things that you can do in some mediums that you can't do in others.
Oh, sure.
Lord of the Rings immediately comes to mind.
Yeah.
Tolkien said that Lord of the Rings was unfilmable. Lots of people think that Peter Jackson proved him wrong. I don't think he did, though. I think that Peter Jackson told a similar story to Lord of the Rings in the movies, but it is not the same, and you lose so much in the movies that you have in the books. I don't think it's possible to make a film adaptation of the Lord of the Rings and maintain everything that the book has.
Can I jump in there?
I'm not sure that the public... Yeah, go.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to say, I think the Peter Jackson films are to, let's say if the books are the Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and all the little tiny little languages that make up the Bible, then the NIV would essentially be Peter Jackson's film.
These words are accepted.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a translation. It holds the core values, and it's a translation, not just an adaptation. But I would argue the reason Tolkien said that was more of a mechanical issue of his time. There was not CGI, there were not things of this nature, and as a result, there were things that analogically connected to basically. I'm trying to make an analogy between a couple different things. Let's say you have a piece of grammar that doesn't exist in English. We have many. I can't think of them to begin up like off the top of my head, but there are pieces of grammar that don't exist in the English language. Essentially, if film is the English language, and we got the book is in the Hebrew, Aramaic, et cetera, right? Then essentially what Tolkien is saying is, because you don't have these grammar elements, you can't actually fully explain, like you can't translate the story. And I think CG helped bridge the gap, but it's not perfect. And so basically, this like you were saying, there's different levels of ability, pros and cons to every language. There are languages that are 10 times simpler than English that are actually more beautifully constructed minimalist languages. And then there are things like, what's it called? What's that one language? Oh, I can't remember it.
You also have ugly minimalist languages like a Newspeak from Orwell.
Right. That's what I was getting to. You have ugly minimalist, you have ugly maximalist. I would argue in many ways, and this is from a Western perspective, so some of this may be skewed, but things like Mandarin does not sound beautiful to me in any way, shape, or form. Not just sound, but the way the language is actually constructed is weird. I find Cantonese much more acceptable, but the accents get funky, and so it's one of these things where language is a system. Systems, you'll appreciate this, Brendan, have a beauty or lack of beauty to them in and of themselves, even before you put content into the system. And so the point being, what was this one called? I got to figure out what this language is that I was thinking of. I was looking it up, but I'm not seeing it. It was essentially trying to create a universal language that people who speak any language, they're going to pick up some of the words, and thus you'll be able to speak. I can't remember.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
it was done by by George Bernard Shaw, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But anyway, you get my point. I'm of the opinion that if any language well, first of all, the gospel is the most universal story. Okay. It is the most universal story. That's why it affects everyone. It's connected to everyone. Everything from, Adam and Eve through Jesus and the second coming. Like that whole story is universal. It's the most universal of all stories. That's why anything that ties into it in any way, shape, or form resonates with us. So, if there is a language that cannot communicate what you're trying to make in the hands of a master, I'm saying we're taking out like executable quality right here. Okay. We're saying like in the hands of a master, if you cannot communicate something that has any resemblance to the gospel, which is what makes a story good, then that language be damned. Straight up. Because you can't communicate the gospel. You see what I'm saying? And we are to put the gospel out in every tribe, tongue, language. Tribe, tongue, nation, language, etc. Languages go beyond like what we speak to each other every day. There's visual languages, there's all kinds of different things. And I get this is why I get so bent out of shape about the 2CV thing. That people put out there, is because literally the letters JESUS in English would be in the strictest covenanter position a second commandment violation, So yeah, go ahead.
Not really a rabbit trail, but something that I thought of. If you were making a movie or an opera or some form of musical, and you had a leitmotif to represent Christ, would that be a second commandment violation?
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. So
I want to ask someone who is super strong 2CV what their thoughts are on that, because
most of them say it has to be visual, and I sit there and most of them have to say it has to be visual, and I sit there and I go, okay, why can I write his name in a pictographic language like Chinese or Japanese, right? Because why am I not mocking him by pretending to be like him when I say it in sign language? Right? Like this is so yeah. Anyway, that's a whole thing, but we won't go too far off on that topic unless we want to come back to it for another segment. Brendan, you've been awfully quiet. What are your thoughts on all this? You're just still processing?
Well, you said a bunch of good stuff in your initial thing. I like that your comment about it being a zero-sum game. I also like Alex's rebuttal about the zero-sum game, and that the medium and the storytelling might not be a zero-sum game, but people's time almost is.
Yes.
So, how you choose to spend your time consuming stories.
That's also on the consumer's end of things more than it is the creator's end of things, right?
Right. And that's where I was going to go.
Right. Go ahead.
But like, it was just sort of a comment like, hey, I like that. Alex's comment on Postman, my memory is that the point of a photograph, it's partly to target a specific thing, but what the photograph does is that it creates a false relevance. So the telegraph creates information that is irrelevant. The photograph makes irrelevant information seem relevant. And so when you combine them, you get this scenario where you have irrelevant information that seems relevant. And that was his thing with television. And I actually agree with that. As somebody who worked in TV and who had to cut all this stuff, and where the rule was, if Joe Biden's name is said, show Joe Biden. And if Trump's name is said, show Trump if we have footage. If something is mentioned, you put it on the screen. And then we think about fires, shootings, accidents, all of these things that happen that your average person is not going to deal with ever. I mean, there was an accident on this road. It's going to slow down your commute. Okay, that's useful. People on the west side of the city got shot last night. No one on the east side cares. All it is sensationalism.
Yeah.
So for me,
and that's the question that he posed: is when was the last time something that you heard in the news changed the way that you lived your day?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, the majority of Postman's arguments are actually hold water just from where I'm sitting. That said, I agree with you fully that a medium is just a language. It is just a medium. Like, if we're not talking about the spiritual people who are trying to talk with the dead, a medium is simply a channel through which something is conveyed. And for me, I agree 100% with Alex that film can tell stories better than books if you're trying to achieve a certain thing. If you're trying to, like, I don't think you could read Mufasa's death in The Lion King as a book form and have it have as much of an emotional impact as watching Simba go to his body, hearing the music, hearing him say, "Dad, Dad, please wake up." I don't think you can have that same emotional impact in a book, at least for me. Some people might. And to Jim Butcher's credit, I don't know if I mentioned this on the Broodcast or what. Freudian slip there. But like Jim Butcher's point is that you can have a bad story idea, but a good author can make it sparkle. So you could have a good author that tells a scene of someone's death and be weeping, right? That can happen. But the barrier to entry for film is much lower because film and TV are designed to target those emotions, I would argue, in a much more visceral, impactful, and immediate way.
You know what else is more visceral and impactful? Your general saying, we're back after the break.
Attention all Christian writers and creative peoples! Are you searching for a place to share your work and receive encouragement from fellow wordsmiths? Look no further than the Broodcast. Inspired by the legendary Inklings of old, a group of writers who banded together during the Second Great War. The Broodcast is your monthly gathering for inspiration, fellowship, and critique. Join us as we share our stories and support our fellow soldiers on our creative missions. Enlist in the Broodcast community today at joshuadavidling.com/brood. Travel cyberspace. Serve the greatest cause. Join the ranks of the Brood today.
Imagine if you had everything Tolkien ever wrote. Well, you can't have his, but you can have mine. The Ling Lyricanium is $10 a month, and you can find it at joshuadavidling.com/LL. That's joshuadavidling.com/LL.
We now return you to the war zone. This is Poets at War.
This is one of the reasons that, well, I was just going to say, this is one of the reasons that I've always been drawn to poetry, is because I find it to be an emotionally heightened form of writing. And the fact is that I only think I would have ever come to poetry because I played with every other format I could get my hands on. And I was format hunting. I was trying to find my language. And I think that I was going to say, if there is a written language that could convey Simba and Mufasa and all that, it would probably be poetry.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead with what you were saying. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, so I say all of this, and so to that end, from a bare bones, if a medium is simply a method of transferring data, information, because emotional stuff is just emotional information, if that is what all a medium is, then there shouldn't be a problem with games. And yet, as a dad, I am hesitant to let my son play games until he has learned how to control himself.
Okay.
I am hesitant to let him, I don't want him sitting in front of an iPad all day. I don't want him sitting in front of a TV all day in his spare time. I don't want him to turn into me because I became addicted to video games for a while. Now,
I think
that's probably coloring some of my image, but at the same time, Kingdom Hearts 2, I cried at the end of Kingdom Hearts 2 because I knew that I experienced an emotional journey and I would never be able to feel that again because when you replay a game that you already know what's going to happen, right? It's like watching a movie again, even though you already know what's going to happen, you know, to a certain degree. There are some, I know I'm the one who says that if spoiling a movie ruins it, then it wasn't a good movie to begin with. So we can make an argument about whether or not re-ingesting stories lessens the impact. I don't think it does, but whatever. The point is, the first time always does have a little bit of an extra because there is that what's going to happen element. So, like, for me, it's like, oh, there are these emotionally charged moments, like games, because you are partaking in them, because you are the one doing the action, even if it's another character, because you're controlling that character and you are doing it, that adds to a level of immediacy. It adds to a level of what's the word for when like you can't take your eyes away from something, you're sucked in, you're
irresistible.
Enthrallment, yeah, sure, whatever. It adds to the experience, right? The fact that you are doing something adds to the experience. Yes, we can read and we can use our imagination and let our minds play a movie in our heads as we read a book. But then we can remove that imagination step by having people watch it. It's less work on their end because working our imagination does take effort. But they're taking away that work element that allows you to step in. And if the movie's well made, then it's like, oh, wow, you're sucked into the experience. Now you add and now you're going to do it. That's another thing to suck you into the experience. And so it's like, I think there are some games, I think there are even some game genres that are not necessarily healthy to play on their own. I think you should, like League of Legends is a MOBA style game. You can binge hours playing matches over and over again. It's like playing a football match, but you don't have to exercise. And because there's matchmaking, you don't have to have a team. I don't want to say, oh, you can never play League of Legends, you can never play Rocket League, you can never pick your multiplayer match-based game of choice. But I would argue it's much healthier for you to have a team already made, and you only play with them. So that way, when they're done, you're done. If one person's done, the whole group is done. It's a level of accountability so that you don't just get sucked and it doesn't feed people who have a tendency toward addictive personality, like me. I tend to be like when I latch onto something, I get sucked in all the way. It's like talking. Once I start talking, I can't stop.
Well, with that, let me just throw this in there. I definitely had my periods of that. One of the things that kept me out of it is the fact that the oldest child, especially with console games and that sort of a thing, when people get turns, if you're a sibling in a homeschool family with video games, this song and dance. If the oldest wants a couple more minutes to finish up what they're doing, they almost immediately become the bad guy when everyone else throws themselves on the ground and cries. So I ended up playing a lot more PC games, and when the PC games that I played in the 90s were not the PC games that are out now, they were The Learning Company, they were Jumpstart, they were all those sorts of fun things, which now Humongous Entertainment, probably the biggest publisher for me, but they did point and click adventure games, they did sports games that were based around the point and click adventure style, which was interesting. But the thing that really hit home to me it's really hitting home to me now. I've been gathering and putting a bunch of video games into our home PC for my daughter to play recently. I've been making them work through VirtualBox and all kinds of other things. It's a whole setup, but I'm finally got it to where I can just download the game from archive.org, install it, go from there, you know? And a lot of these I still have somewhere on CD, you know? And so I'm able to go, oh yeah, that game was great. And as I'm compiling and putting all these things in a list for her to play when she has the permission from mom to do so on the TV in the living room, which is a little different than being off on your own. Which is, I think, one of the biggest issues when it comes to video games is being off on your own. But that's with any medium, even books, girls in their erotica, for example, right? Even guys in their erotica, but you know what I'm saying? Like the typical is, yeah. So point being that not only is she in the living room by herself or with everybody and not by herself, but she is also playing a lot of games that put a lot of emphasis on critical thinking and puzzle solving, not as, even though I had some edutainment titles that are more like, here's a math problem, here's a spelling problem, even though she has some of those. I think people forget how important the problem solving aspect and the dexterity, mental side of the dexterity, like come into the process. Playing Tony Hawk is exhausting. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games take a ton of mental resources because you're doing a lot of things with that controller all at once. And first-person shooters are so hard for me most of the time. If you're doing a dual analog stick, I can't play dual analog stick. Like it's just my brain does not work that way. I can play with a mouse and a keyboard, but I cannot do dual analog sticks. I'm sure you can. That's awesome. But like, it's just one of those.
That's how I grew up.
Right. And so you're doing mental dexterity exercises that, yes, you're doing fine motor skills, and that's not as beneficial in every kind of scenario. But the mental gymnastics that you have to do to even go through a first person shooter and win a match is actually beneficial. The thing is, how much of that, like, it's like long division. At a certain point, you know how to do long division, and you need to stop doing long division and move on to the next thing. Right. And that doesn't mean that you can't go back to long division if you enjoy it, but that becomes recreation time as opposed to learning time. And so for me, it's recreation time to read Lord of the Rings. It's not learning anything for me to read Lord of the Rings. I know what happens in Lord of the Rings. I might be able to like pick up some very big specifics and quotes and find, you know, things that I forgot about and whatever else, but that has become recreation. So for me, I think that we need to have an all-encompassing view of what you can get out of video games, but not just in a materialistic way or an educational only way, but in an emotional way. Like, I do still get trained by Lord of the Rings in my emotions, right? I do still get trained. I'll give a video game example. The first RPG I ever experienced was my father playing and me watching and him reading the cards for Super Mario RPG Legends of the Seven Stars, which they are remaking for the Switch, and it looks awesome. But that game had such a cool story. You know, we got your basic Mario, and everyone knows your basic Mario: kill the dragon, save the girl. Super Mario RPG flips that on its head. Are you guys familiar with the story or no? Sort of. I'll just give you the very basic. It starts out, kill the dragon, save the girl, but a third party, a giant sword, crashes through Bowser's castle and throws Bowser, Peach, and Mario in all different directions. And essentially this sword has taken over Bowser's castle, and you have to you start to realize that this is another dimensional being that has come down and is taking over the world. and there's another almost angelic being that comes down from the stars named Gino, who you meet up along the way. And it turns out that there are 7 star pieces you have to bring together to fight the bad guy, whatever. Typical Japanese RPG kind of stuff, but in a Mario game. And you end up, spoiler alert, teaming with Bowser to do it because you're co-belligerents, right? So like it took Mario, very simple story, and gave it this huge, just cosmic thing to it. And my dad was like playing through this story and we were figuring it out together. I was 6 when it came out. And like, I helped him solve some of the puzzles, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just him. Like, I was helping him solve the puzzles and he was reading the story to me as we went. And that is emotional training for me, going back to that story, because it helps me remember what's important. Even like coming back to certain points in the story and coming back to remembrance of our moments together and all that. And yeah, that's tied to something else, but it's a little bit more to play that game versus another game, right? Mm-hmm. For me, not for everybody. And so we need to weigh all of the benefit that we get out of a game and say, are we just doing this because it's comfortable? Or are we actually doing it because we're getting something out of it that we can't quite put our finger on yet? And is it worth the time? I think Postman's correct in that you can do anything to an obsessive level and be sinning, even though he doesn't use those phrases. And essentially, like, am I correct? He doesn't use those phrases? Yeah, because he's not.
No,
yeah.
Lord, no.
No. Didn't think so. Essentially, we would say sinning. And like that's all possible. And it's something that we do, and it is a tendency of certain people and certain personalities to that kind of sloth, and we got to watch for that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what looks like sloth in one person isn't in another person, because they've got something completely else going on under the dome and in their heart, right? Just depends, Yeah. I think there's more there than people like to talk about on this level, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's hard because right now we're trying to be both talking about mediums in general and kind of focusing on video games, where if we're focusing on video games, it's like the fact of the matter is, one, there isn't anything wrong with just entertaining, right? It's the only people who don't like escapism or jailers. It's that whole thing again.
And I go one step further and say, not only is there nothing wrong with entertainment, but entertainment is actually a noble thing for yourself as a consumer, but also as an artist, right? It's a good thing to entertain and be entertained. And that, in and of itself, that phrase is something that the church has major issues with. Because we're fighting against Pokemon-themed worship services.
And there's a difference between entertainment and amusement.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because amusement is, and this is, I don't think Postman talks about this, but amusement means not thinking. Muse is the word for think, and A is the negative particle, or participle. And so it means not thinking. There's a vast difference between something that is entertaining you, and you get to the end of it, and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. And something that you watch and it's entertaining you, and then at the very end you're like, okay, I'm going to go watch the next thing that's exactly like that. Hallmark. Stuff like that. There is a vast difference there.
Oh, wow. And we just lost the majority of women above 50.
Did we have any of them?
I guess that's the question.
I was going to say, our tens and tens of listeners, that doesn't seem like our demographic.
Yeah,
we're like 60% male. It's not like an overwhelming majority, but we definitely skew in the 25 to 35 demographic mainly.
Yeah.
So,
no. I would have said YouTube, but fair enough. That is a good point. From a linguistic standpoint, amuse, and entertain, but also games like you mentioned, they teach. You were talking about like emotional education or Like, not even just like the controls and the fact of the matter is people can perform microsurgery better if they play FPS games, because microsurgery, the brain just is able to manipulate things without using your hands. You're using a remote. That I can play this translates to I can do surgery better. It just like yeah, there are skills, but also there are the challenges, and there are other elements you can do. I think story, the fact that like I tend to, when I talk about this, I tend to like oversimplify into two sort of categories: story based and match based. Match based are your things like Rocket League, Overwatch, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Dota, whatever. The point is, it's very much like a football game or a baseball game or a pickup basketball game or whatever. There's a match, you have a set goal. Once the goal is achieved, the game's over. Whereas a story, it's kind of the same thing, except instead of it being like, instead of it being an arbitrary number of points or an arbitrary building you've got to destroy or an arbitrary cart you have to push through this thing, and the challenge in the matches is the challenge in the match-based game is that you are playing against another player and you're playing mental chess in real time. And then that's not counting into like cover, walls, dodging. What skills do the character have? How do I avoid them? Blah blah blah. Whereas with a story, it's a story. Everyone knows what the end point of a story is. Usually, it's when the credits roll and the end screen comes up, right? And so I've always argued, probably incorrectly now that I think about it, but I've always argued that even though like match-based games, yes, you can learn a lot. You learn a lot of technical skills and logic and problem solving in that area, which is why I disagree that books are the best logical thing that you said way in the beginning, Alex. Slight disagreement on that, but I can't actually make a good argument right now. But I always argue
I was quoting Postman.
Oh, well, still. I argue that I was always arguing, probably incorrectly now that I think about it, that story-based games were better because you do still get some of that sort of internal logic of, okay, this game has presented me with a challenge. How do I beat this challenge? But then you also have the added benefit of character, story, that whole thing. And that's not even getting into how does the game tell the story. You've got Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario or these other Mario games where the story is written out in cards, right? You've got the standard JRPG style where you go, you have a cutscene, you've got people telling the story. But then you have Elden Ring and Dark Souls and all Soulsborne games where the story isn't told to you. Or let me rephrase, where 80% of the story isn't told to you. If you just play through the game from start to finish, yeah, all of the events will happen. Yeah, you beat all the bosses, but that doesn't mean you know the story. The story is hidden in item descriptions, in extra dialogue with characters, and in like the set pieces, in the architecture, in the soundscape, in the there are layers in that, so it's like you have to, like with Dark Souls, you literally have to be a detective to find out what the heck is going on with this side character, because otherwise you miss it. So yeah, I don't know. Again, like the reason why I brought this up partly is so that I can have you guys help me think through this, because I'm battling this. I think stories are great. I think video games are a great method of telling stories. They're really engaging, and they can make you think, and they can present challenges to you while you think, and they can provide an interesting way of like providing worldview, because all movies and games have a worldview to them, but like games force you to interact with the worldview of the creator. But then I also was worried about bumping my mic. I'm also worried about my son and not wanting him because games are so compelling, because there is that interactivity, I was like, I don't want him to get hooked on this so much that I don't, so while I disagree with the fundamentalists, I see where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even getting into the question of how does it change the neurology? How does playing a game change your brain?
Negatively or positively?
Negatively or positively. It could be negative. It could be positive. A lot of the fundamentalists are afraid of the negative, not without just cause, given the attention span decrease, as I've mentioned before. But is that purely, again, I don't know if the negative attention span is because of the medium, or is it because of the stories being told by the medium with the medium? And is Postman's point about the medium being the message, is all that saying is this new medium has the potential to shorten our attention span?
This is a randomized attention span test, soldier, also known as a commercial break.
And now is the time for your book review minute with Alexander Robertson, the part of the show where Alexander Robertson comes out and reviews a book.
I have heard it said that Chesterton has a way of flipping your living room upside down and showing you things that you never could have seen when it was right side up. In Notes from the Tilt-A-Whirl, Indy Wilson does that with everything from the common ant to the solar system. With a joyous abandon reminiscent of Tom Bombadil, he shows the beauty of the magical world in which we live. Along with providing a positive vision of the world, he also takes great pleasure in popping the pretty little balloons of the Western philosophers who have shaped the way that we see the world. He speaks of Kant, Nietzsche, and Hume with the same disdain that conservatives have for Marx and progressives have for Rand. With all this heady philosophical talk and esoteric natural philosophy, it would be very easy to never touch down to earth, but Wilson threads the needle expertly, never failing to connect the metaphysics of which he speaks with practical wisdom for action in the everyday world. Tilt-A-Whirl is my favorite book. It changed the way I see the world, and I believe it is a must-read for Christians who want to push their faith to the edges of their thoughts and actions. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him were all things made. Welcome to his poem, his play, his novel. Skip the bowls of fruit and statues. Let the pages flick your thumbs. This is his spoken world. Excerpt from Chapter 0. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Sarah Levesque, Editor-in-Chief of Logo Sophia magazine. I would like to invite you to explore our Pilgrim's Journal of Life, Love, and Literature, both in visual format and in podcast format. Our goal is to help bridge the gaps between different Christian denominations and traditions. Please visit our website at logosophiamag.com to read or listen to stories, articles, poetry, and more, all for free. We look forward to journeying with you.
We now welcome you back to Poets at War. All right,
because of the way we tell the story.
I was gonna say, can I got to choose your own adventure here, guys. We'll play a video game, so to speak, because we're on video, so it counts.
Do we need to start moving like NPCs?
Hopefully not black-pilled NPCs. Anyway, okay, so we've got. I can go one way with talking the negative or positive. I can go, let's do a word study with entertain versus amuse, because I was doing some research on that and it's very fascinating. And then I had another one, but I'm forgetting it. That's funny. I was almost forgetting it, but it was attention span. Do we want to do all three? Do we want to go one at a time real quick? What do you want to do?
Let's go.
Yeah. Speed run. Okay. Let's do the word study since I have that in front of my face. So this is the Google / DuckDuckGo definition. Okay, WordNick is where they pull from. So then I'm going to go to 1828, and then I'm going to go to the etymology. Okay, so their definition is, number one, to hold the attention of someone with something amusing. There's that word, or diverting. Okay, so that's like modern definition. Let's go to Webster's. Webster says under the one that the meaning we're going for, to treat with conversation, to amuse or instruct by discourse properly, to engage the attention and retain the company of one by agreeable conversation, discourse, or argument. The advocate entertained his audience for an hour with sound argument and brilliant displays of eloquence. So that's 28. But when we actually go back to the Latin, inter as the prefix and tenere, to hold. So essentially you are inviting someone to come together into a hold. You see what I'm saying? Like this is essentially like to entertain would be to anything from hold hands to invite someone into your home. There is a interlocking mechanism to entertainment. We are interfacing with one another, right? For lack of a better term. Yeah, go ahead.
And we still use that in the sense, I'm entertaining guests, something like that.
Yes, exactly.
I like that. I like that 18th part of the 1828, to engage the attention and retain the company of one. I think that's a great definition of entertain.
Yes, and they even use the word amuse, but they say amuse or instruct by discourse, right? Okay, so with all that
and
being
then they say properly to amuse or instruct by discourse properly to engage the attention.
Yep. The negative positive aspect we've gone over too much. I'm not going to actually go into that one, but let me touch on the attention span. Attention span, I would let me argue this. I think that there is situational time and space for a large or small attention span, and it's not just moment to moment, but generation to generation. I would point back to the 1800s and the spiritualist movement as people having too much of an attention span in a big way, right? They're willing to go down Gnostic rabbit holes to try to find secret knowledge, right? They're not turned off by the fact that they have to bring a third dead cat to the next meeting, right? As opposed to someone who's like in a good manner of today's situation, a guy who's actively killing sin of lust. That is actually strong enough to where he can be like, TikTok, okay, flip, and like he sees a naked woman, boop, done. Not, you know what I'm saying? It not actually affect him in any major way, right? That's someone who has a low attention span in a good way, right? Now, I'm not saying that he has a low attention span for everything that way, right? A real wise person either gives everything proper amount of attention. That's a wise person. Now you're talking the general populace. We have a very unwise general populace currently with a low attention span. I believe in the 1800s during the spiritual movement, we had a very unwise populace with a very low attention or with a very high attention span, right? I don't think wisdom is tied to attention span in any particular way. However, I think a wise person actually says there is a variety of needs as far as my attention span.
Sure, but I don't think anybody who would be arguing against mediums being new are saying that people should or shouldn't have longer or shorter attention spans. I think they would agree with you as far as you would say what they would be like. And this is me saying what they would say. Their point would be, yes, but these mediums are
dumbing down people,
inhibiting the ability to have a longer attention span when needed.
I think that's more of a result of saturation than it is a saturation of a singular medium. And this goes back to variety again, right?
and this is where I would point out that people can play video games for hours on end. How is that a short attention span?
Right. How do people, well, I was going to bring up when you were first going on your rant, people listen to podcasts and they listen to podcasts about stupid things, and they listen to podcasts that are absolutely equivalent or even more intelligent, theology podcast, anyone, than the Lincoln Douglas debate. Right? Like, for real, you know, I'm putting that there. They're smarter than Lincoln. I don't know about Douglas. I don't know very much about Douglas, but they're smarter than Lincoln. You know what I mean? And so my point stands that having a variety of these things, and that's where I was wrong, digging. Well, I hesitate to say wrong because it's different periods of your life too. There are periods where people need to engross themselves, even for long periods of time, in singular thought. To gain wisdom. One of the things that I got ragged on a lot growing up from my aunt and my mother, who were my two main teachers, was my insatiable love for fantasy literature. But it wasn't because it was fantasy. They were not in the satanic panic situation. It was because I wasn't reading anything else. And the fact is, I had a really hard time reading anything else because of a lot of extenuating factors. But when I was finally sick of fantasy, I looked at other things. I needed to exhaust that well before I could give any real attention to anything else, right? And so that just goes to what the individual needs. You know, this is something that I'm constantly telling my children is, you know, any kids, you know, unfortunately, due to what the media portrays, kids saying that's not fair, that phrase always gets batted around. And my answer to that is, well, would you like me to give a dog chocolate too? Right? If I give you guys chocolate, if we had a dog, would I give him chocolate too? No, because that would kill him. Exactly. You get what you need. And it's my job as the parent to be the person who is wisely choosing what you need in a lot of these situations, right? And not all kids can do that, to your point, Brendan, especially early on. And so you have to be the wise one for them. But I think it really comes down to, what is this creature? What are they for? How did God make them? And ask for wisdom on how God made them in order to come to your conclusions. I don't think it's we need to have it. We can't quantify this thing down to a simple science, right? This is an individual basis. There's far too many variables than people ever give God credit for, ever give anyone credit for with individual human beings. There's so much variety in this world, and every different variety needs another variety. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a wisdom issue. I think that you're exactly right. As the attention span stuff being a wisdom issue, I would push back against a long attention span being a bad thing. I think that having the ability to spend hours focusing on a specific thing, 7 hours focusing on the Lincoln Douglas debate,
having the ability to do it is good.
Ability to have de facto.
Right. Okay. Having the ability to do it
with that is
right. Because what is Perilandra about? He had too much patience. Right? Yep. Adam had too much patience with Satan.
He should have punched him first.
Right, exactly. He should have immediately turned. And so should have Ransom, you know, and it almost fell apart. Yeah. But he did finally know what he needed to do, and he did it. And he dropped his attention span, you know? So this is wisdom, like you're saying.
Yeah. That's the one thing that I would kind of push back on. Having the ability to go for hours and hours and hours can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can totally do bad things with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would argue being able to multitask, which is what a short attention span is, honestly. I would argue that, because it's not always doing something simultaneous. It can be doing some things rapid fire. and having the ability to do some things rapid fire and completely drop this and pick this up and drop this and pick this up can be extremely beneficial. Just look at the way that I've been putting on Build-A-Bar, how I do my work in a day and how I get everything done. I put everything in little tiny chunks and I go rapid fire one thing to another to keep myself from, and I don't think that's just compensating, because I don't think I would be as fast if I did have a long attention span, right? Because I'm a different creature. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's still that almost seems more like a skill.
Yeah.
Like switching is a skill. And that's
or a muscle.
A fantastic skill to have.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, how long have we been going? Because I'm going to probably just top up this one long conversation into multiple segments. 1:18:35, but we were recording slightly before official start time. What other things, in regard to your son and planning for the future, Brendan, and that sort of a thing, are there some experiences that are essentially on the chopping block for you that you wish weren't? Like experiences in games that you want to share with him, but you worry about how they will affect him.
I don't think there are any experiences that are on the chopping block, in the sense that on the chopping block for me says things that I would cut. There are things that I would not do with him because I don't think they're particularly good. They're not particularly beneficial experiences in the long run. I kind of enjoyed them while I did it, but I could have done without that. There are other experiences that I would totally love to watch him play through or play through with him. But the question for those are when.
Right.
And because for me, like, my ultimate, like, I say, I'm worried about this sort of stuff. I'm worried about doing these things with him. But I kind of came to the conclusion that I would probably participate, and you can go. It's fine. I would probably let him eventually, when, for me, it's less a question of when. It's more a question of when is really like my ultimate end thought is when, not if, because I don't see this technology going away anytime soon. And I would rather have him start under my care than when he's in college.
Right.
And no one is keeping tabs on him. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like, that's why I latched onto the stories. I would love to watch him play through Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Pick a Final Fantasy. I would love to watch him play through Final Fantasies. If I had money, I would play through Final Fantasy 14 with him.
Mm-hmm.
Level side by side in an MMO. Have fun. Guild Wars 2 has characters that are problematic, but the story is really good, in my opinion. I would love to play through that with him. Kingdom Hearts. I mean, I know some people don't think Kingdom Hearts is a great story. I'll admit, it's nostalgia for me, but it's still fun. And I would love to watch him play through that and talk through with him. I want to... I don't think there are any experiences that I have experienced that I'm worried about him experiencing necessarily, except for ones that I would be like, you really don't need to do that.
Right.
Like League of Legends. And again, all of the games are match-based. The ones that I'm like, I could have done without. It's all the match-based stuff. All the things where it's like popcorn binging. The difference is, instead of one popcorn kernel, it's a 30-minute long game that you can't truncate.
Right.
And so you eat 2 popcorn kernels. Oh, look, you've lost an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So
and
like,
I think that you've
go.
I think that you've already understood a solution for that, which is having an actual squad, having people. So no, you can't play TF2. unless you have 4 friends that you can play with.
Yeah.
And if you who enjoy playing TF2, sure, log on for a match. As soon as one of you gets off, all of you get off. That's a good rule. That is a fantastic rule.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the thing. Like, I'm I really like your rule, or Joshua, you're right, the fact that they're playing in the living room, right?
Right.
So so in this case, it would be your gaming rig, whatever it might be, if it's a console, if it's a computer, whatever, is in a public area of the house.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot play unless you're in that public area.
Right.
Done. Congratulations. We've just solved 90% of gaming problems.
Exactly.
Yep.
We sure have.
Yeah.
Well, even with, I have an old phone that I let her use for certain mobile apps. She knows how to skip ads. She's learned how to do that, which I think is a valuable skill to begin with to get through stuff like that. And then secondly, so that she's learned how to use the camera, and she has certain rules with the camera, has to be fully clothed, for example, before you do anything with it, very basic kind of stuff. But she also has to be in the living room with that. She can't use it at other places. That's the one place where she can do it, and she only has certain times where she can use that. Now, the computer is more a la carte because it's on the TV. It's like in the living room. It's a console, and we have a little lap desk that you can have the mouse and keyboard with, right? And so basically, she's able to ask to play that anytime she's awake. And we can say no because of X, Y, or Z, but she knows that's always available more or less. And we say yes more than we say no. Whereas the phone is during Peter's nap time, which is in the middle of the day. And that'll change when he stops taking naps. But the idea is that's the one time where you can play your phone. She used to be able to take it to a friend's house who also had a phone, and they did some stuff, but that has since gone away for various reasons too. But I want her to be even beyond games. I want my daughter to be familiar with a smartphone UI and with a desktop UI in order to be able to, in order to be able to navigate things, which I learned that stuff at her age, at 5 years old. I learned all of that kind of stuff. I think 5 was when I got my first, and it's so cool seeing her play the games that were my very first games. Arthur's Teacher Trouble, Living Books. That might be way too early for you guys. Not sure, but it was a point and click book. Basically, you get your pages and you can click the words and it'll read them out loud, and then you can click anything within the page and it'll interact. And like, that was the first game my mother taught me. Okay, this is the CD. This is how you hold the CD. This is how you put it in. You do all these things. You have to make sure it doesn't get all scratched up or it won't work, And so, like,
you do not use the CD as a frisbee.
Exactly. Even more than just the original, like the game itself, and the fact that I was learning reading comprehension. And, by hearing a book read aloud and being able to click, what is this word? Oh, okay, etc. And lots of other things. I was and looking for secrets and Easter eggs. Even though I was learning all that, I was also learning the UI of a computer to get a game to run, and how to take care of the physical paraphernalia, the mouse, the keyboard, the CD, all that other stuff that comes along with interfacing with this grand device, right? And so all of she knows how to work the smart TV. She knows these sorts of things. And I cannot stress this as a millennial enough. If I have to show one more Zoomer or Boomer how to connect a printer to a computer, good gracious, it will be the death of me. Which is why we have to teach the next generation these things and put the carrot on the end of the stick. Crazy. You can play a game. Yeah, exactly. So we don't go crazy. Because Alex is Zoomer, but he's like in the millennial category too in some ways.
He's an honorary.
I'm a
millennial.
Zoomer. I'm a Zoomer from Christian homeschool subculture, so I'm 10 years behind.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. There you go. He's honorary millennial.
I got to plug up other headphones so y'all
I'm
continue
deeply
on.
offended by that.
These guys are dying, so y'all continue on. I'm going to plug up these, okay?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, you go, Alex.
Regarding teaching kids technology, there's a really amazing YouTuber. I really love his content. He is incredibly insightful. I have a hard time recommending him because he is incredibly vulgar, but his name is CJVX. And he does incredibly deep philosophical takes on technology, basically. I don't think that he has a video shorter than 15 minutes, and the average length of his video is like 2 hours. He has like 14 videos. He's that type of YouTuber. He's part of RedTube, LeftTube. Very, very similar. Yeah, except for he comes out with a video like twice a year, something like that.
Oh, okay.
And he has one on, it's called Bo Burnham versus Jeff Bezos, and whenever I recommend it to people, I say that it is a take on capitalism, transhumanism,
and their effect on the human soul. Hi everyone, this is post-production Alex here, and unfortunately we suffered a little bit of a recording snafu whenever recording. Long story short, my audio got lost, so I'm just going to do my best to explain what I was saying in the episode. So, in CJ's video, he tells this story of himself sitting on a plane and watching this little girl play a video game where she's acting like a doctor on her iPad to a bunch of stuffed animals. And he talks about her understanding intuitively that tapping is how you make change, and whenever tapping fails, she tries to reach through the screen to grab the towel and reveal the stuffed animal. And he ends that by saying, they don't know it's not real. And so the question that I had for the guys was, how do you treat technologies like this, these incredibly realistic technologies, whenever a child's mind is so impressionable that they can't tell what is real and what's not real? How are we supposed to act in the raising of children whenever you have that
problem? Okay, so this gets into a category of where is deception, and this might be a whole other episode at some point, but let's briefly touch on it because we've got a little bit of time. Where is deception part of an artistic medium, acceptable as part of an artistic medium? One example that immediately comes to mind is professional wrestling, where the mind of a child isn't going to know that it's fake. But the vast majority of the people who are involved know that it is, and they accept it for what it is. Same thing with a magician, right? And there are people who go into the category illusionist magician, who go into that situation and go, oh, was this, blah, 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 and there are Christians and fundamentalists who get up in arms about that, even beyond witchcraft. Some of them just say it's lying, right? I've heard some people who are fundamentalists say that about pro wrestling and stunt work and CGI, and that's why it's, all these, like, they really go crazy with this stuff. And so I think that the thing that you're itching at is actually brought up by I believe it's Mr. Beaver, right? And I think we brought it up on Poets at War before, where he says, when something appears human but isn't human, you keep quiet and you reach for your hatchet or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, right? And I think that's the thing that's got your trigger going, is there's deception on a totalitarian level and deception on an artistic level, like the Blair Witch Project, right? So it really comes down to intention at that point. Am I right? Did I just solve it? I didn't mean to.
So I'm not sure exactly what I said here, but I know that I said something along the lines of, Obviously, the actual answer to this is wisdom. If everybody is using this technology wisely, then we don't have a problem. The same can be said about cars. The same can be said about any technology that we actually have problems with in society today. But how do we act understanding that the vast majority of people are not going to be using the technology wisely because they simply haven't been trained by their churches, by their families, by their parents, by culture, to think in that way, especially in matters as complex as this one.
Right. So how then shall we live, but also how then shall we encourage others to live? And as far as that goes, I think we need to be really careful about dealing out specific advice without saying wisdom first. Because there are people, a lot of people in liberal geek communities who that's one of the biggest reasons why they got on the whole path toward, and I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it's that why they got on the path toward all their deconstruction BS is the fact that they believed that they were not allowed to question, they were not allowed to say, but what about, and there was no room for wisdom. It was, this is the rule, right?
I would like to make a piece of specific instruction.
Go for it.
Make better games, Christians. Same advice I give to all the filmmakers.
Make better iPads.
And make better iPads. Well, make better iPad apps.
Yeah.
The tech is there.
Yeah.
You don't need to change. You don't need to change.
Well, no. I'm saying that there are ecosystems like the iPad, and there are things inherent in that are that have issues. Okay. And so the point is, everything's going to have issues, whether it's made by a Christian or not. But the point is, if you're consistently making everything better, this is the Kuyperian hope, right? If you're consistently making everything better to the best of your ability, guided by the Holy Spirit, things actually get better, at least for a time. At least, yeah. Regardless of whether you.
But yeah, that's my.
Go ahead.
That's my specific advice.
Yeah.
Make stuff.
Yeah.
Do it better than them.
And don't sit there and think that being a politician and making laws to regulate things makes it better.
and this will be a different topic for a different day. Stop tearing down other people who are doing a good job.
Amen.
I'm looking at you, all you people who go after the chosen.
My issues are with the marketing, not even with the show. So I haven't really seen much of the show, but that's a whole other thing with marketing,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not saying that they're perfect. I'm just saying that the people who target and tear it down,
oh, for sure,
without actually watching it or anything like that,
for sure,
they're not helping.
Right?
You aren't helping. Stop it.
Yep. And get better marketing.
Okay,
Sorry.
This one is actually relatively simple to repeat. I said, assuming that portraying Jesus on film isn't a 2CV violation, the third episode of The Chosen is the best episode of television I have ever seen. It is 30 minutes long, but it goes by like it was 10 minutes. It is so unbelievably well-paced. I just absolutely love it.
Do we want to wrap there, though?
I think that would be a good spot.
Good spot? Yeah. Okay, well, people, be your family's bard. Make things, build things, make them better. I almost feel like I need a Cookie Monster voice there or something. Make things better, make Cookie better.
Or Arnold Schwarzenegger doing the Terminator voice.
Yeah, there you go.
For y'all's sake, I'm not going to repeat my terrible bad Arnold impression.
And do it by the power of the Holy Spirit, guys. Be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. We'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War. There they go.
Sword at least I right shall